So I want to start off this video by showing you guys a damage comparison. We all can agree that Solar Warlocks Fusion grenades are really strong, right? Well, here's the damage that 2 of these grenades can do against this Omen. We even set off 1 ignition there, and we left about a quarter of his health, so not too bad. And in this example, I had 187 grenade stat for my Warlock, so my grenade is hitting pretty dang hard. Okay, now let's check what I'm doing over here on the good old Titan. We go ahead and kill 2 full Omens and leave a third one half health. That's pretty insane when you compare that to those Solar Warlock grenades. I also only have 158 melee stat in this example, so I am missing out on roughly 15% more damage there if I really wanted to push that melee stat up. And then another cool thing about this is check out the ad clear that it has. We clear this entire room of what, 12 enemies I think? I mean, just look at the area of reach this ability has. It's pretty crazy. So the gameplay you're going to watch is all from the Mythic world tier, where I am 50 power level under. There are some really tanky enemies in there, and I have been tagged with some comments of people saying how much they're struggling in there to do decent damage and survive. Well, I think this Titan build covers both sides of that. It has a very strong ability that we're just going to be spamming left and right. And I wasn't even using Monte Carlo with it, so it could be even better if your goal is to throw out as much of these as you want. Also, our super hits very hard as well, and it's a roaming super, so we get it back quickly. Then our survivability is up there with the best of them. Thanks to Woven Mail for that 45% damage reduction, and Banner of War that creates that healing pulse for ourselves and our teammates. If I'll say anything about these solar subclasses, like the Starfire Protocol build, they struggle with survivability because they don't have any built-in damage reduction to their kit. Also, Banner of War gives a melee damage buff, and pulses from the banner give us melee energy back, and this is a lot more now thanks to the new stat system. Now these 2 buffs that just happened is really what makes this build feel so much better. First, of course, is Banner of War. The melee damage bonus for users and allies increased from 40% to 100%. So a nice little buff there. Now I'm not sure if that scales with every stack of Banner of War. I really wouldn't see why not, but don't quote me on that. And we also have a buff to the Wishful Ignorance. The maximum PvE Fletchet Storm melee damage, which we're using in this video, is increased from 50% to 200%. So when you stack both this Banner of War and the Wishful Ignorance exotic, and then you add the new melee stat in there, we have some great damage to rival some of the best in the game, but then we also have the build built where we can spam these things and survive in difficult content. So of course the first aspect is Fletchet Storm. You use this just like the Consecration Slam. While sliding, activate your charged melee ability to leap into the air. It'll knock back enemies in front of you, and then while airborne, you just activate your charged melee again over and over to launch as many of those clusters as you want. They're unraveling projectiles, so they unravel targets. And then the second aspect is Banner of War, right? Just defeating targets with that melee attack, or finishers or swords, but we're mainly just using that melee attack. We'll raise that Banner of War that pulses with energy. It'll periodically heal you and nearby allies, and it increases our melee and sword damage. Also, targets defeated by you and allies charge the banner, increasing the speed of its pulses. A great survivability tool. You guys all know what this thing does. Now we're pairing both of those and the buffs I just went over with the new melee stat, which I had 158 of, with the Wishful Ignorance exotic gauntlets. I've never done a build with these. I tested them out in the past. They were good, but they just weren't quite there yet. Well, now they are. We gain an additional melee charge, so that's why you see me with 4, and then Fletchet Storm briefly increases their damage with each strike. You'll see Dragon's Talons on the left-hand side proc up to ×3, so you're doing even more damage with this exotic. And then also, pulses from your Banner of War return melee energy based on the number of allies healed. So for the stacks on Fletchet Storm, I believe it's a 50% damage buff at 3 stacks, which you're going to be hitting all the time. And then I believe the Banner of War pulse grants 5% melee back, but this is scaled based on that melee stat now, with chunk energy gains, right? So we're getting closer to like 14%, I believe, on each heal. And that's just with you solo. You get even more of that if you're healing your teammates. So if 3 of you guys are running around together in this difficult content, you're gonna get a lot more of that melee coming back very quickly. And then we build the rest of the kit to get it back even faster. So for the grenade of choice, I like Grapple Grenade. Again, this works with the melee stat as well, so we're scaling our grapple damage too. And then we're gonna take a couple fragments here. The first one is Thread of Fury. Damaging targets with tangles grants melee energy. If you pick up that tangle and throw it into a group of enemies, you can easily get 2 full charges of your melee back. And I believe we get extra melee coming back because of that melee stat. We'll take Threat of Generation, dealing damage generates grenade energy, just to keep up that grapple. We'll also add Threat of Warding, picking up an Orb of Power grants you Woven Mail. This is that 45% damage reduction. It does only last for 5 seconds, but you're gonna create an Orb of Power on every throw with your melee that there'll be so many Orbs of Power on the ground, you shouldn't have a problem with keeping Woven Mail up. And then the last fragment slot is completely up to you. Use whatever you want there, whatever you think fits the build the best. I just threw on Threat of Propagation because I wanted that plus 10 to melee. And then speaking of weapons, Monte Carlo would just be another great one to add to the build, right? You could spam so many of these with Monte Carlo that it's just ridiculous. I didn't want to pigeonhole myself into just using that weapon. I've been having a blast with Graviton Spike, and I was pairing that with this entire build. Now for your artifact mods, you don't really need any, but you could add in anything that adds to the Strand subclass. There's something like Tightly Woven, where you get increased class ability and grenade stats when you have Woven Mail. You could do Refresh Threads, picking up an elemental pickup, or a Tangle, grants energy to your least charged ability. You could definitely add in Shield Crush. While you have Woven Mail, your melee recharges faster and deals increased damage. And then you could even do Tangled Web, creating a tangle by defeating a Strand debuff target suspends nearby combatants. But again, none of these are needed, the build will work perfectly fine. Now let's go through the mods on the build. On the helmet, we'll just take a hands-on to get bonus super energy on all those melee kills, and I liked a special ammo finder. In our gauntlets, we're going to take 3 copies of heavy-handed. This means every 1 second you can spawn an Orb of Power with a melee kill. Basically every cast of your Fletched Storm is spawning an Orb of Power if it kills something. On your chest piece, that's all your damage reduction, so just match whatever activity you're doing. On the boots, I went with full melee regeneration. So I took Invigoration, reduce melee cooldown each time you pick up an Orb of Power. Orbs of Restoration, picking up an Orb of Power grants a small amount of energy to your least charged ability, and Absolution, reduce all ability cooldowns each time you pick up an Orb of Power. And again, with our melee stat being so high, and we get those chunk energy gains, every time you pick up an Orb of Power, you're getting a good like 35% to your melee. On the class item, this is really open for whatever you want as well. I mean, I had a Reaper mod in there, but I wasn't casting my Barricade very often. I also had Outreach, but again, wasn't taking advantage of that very often. And then I had a special finisher. So if I did get my 3 armor charges, I could finish something and create special ammo for me and my fire team. I hope you guys give this build a shot because it's such a different playstyle. And I'm sure a lot of you have never fully built into Fletched Storm and tried it out. Thank you so much for watching, I really appreciate it, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Have a great rest of your day.
Might as well spend it. Or get stomped out of it.